Greetings. Welcome to the BankBeat Quick Takes video blog. My name is Tom Bengtson. I'm publisher of BankBeat magazine and the website bankbeat.biz. My guest today is Robert Johnston, founder and chief executive officer of Adlumin, a cybersecurity technology firm that helps financial institutions secure sensitive data and intellectual property. Rob is a cybersecurity expert with all kinds of experience, including counter-espionage engagements against nation-state criminal and hacktivist organizations across a variety of industries. And most notably, Rob led the investigation into the Russian Foreign Intelligence Services breach of the Democratic National Committee in 2016. Earlier, he was an officer in the United States Marine Corps, where he led a variety of cybersecurity efforts. We had a chance to visit with Rob about a year ago during Cybersecurity Awareness Month. We're very pleased to welcome him back for an in-depth discussion of cybersecurity. Welcome, Rob. It is great to reconnect with you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
You bet. Rob, with the uncertainty of the current work environment these days, what are some of the vulnerabilities that banks are up against that might affect cybersecurity?
The remote workforce has definitely, changed a lot, even in banking and finance. We're finding that, people have, or organizations have a greater amount of VPN usage, right? So they're allowing or are certainly more forgiving of people working from home. They're also much more using cloud email and cloud services has been a much more desirable technical outcome for organizations. It's easier to manage, and it's certainly easier to manage when you have a workforce that may or may not be working from within the confines of their own home. So with this new kind of expanded freedom, certainly comes a new set of issues and vulnerabilities associated with it. And we see a lot of threat actors exploiting remote work technologies, like breaking into O365 environments, breaking into VPN environments, because the same old usernames and passwords are being used and never changed over many years, or leaked in some data breach somewhere because people are reusing their passwords. So it's become a much more relevant threat, I think, than it used to be, specifically in the community banking industry, where previously I don't think it was an often occurrence that people were actually working from home, right? Everyone came into the bank, into the branch, into the headquarters, and worked from there. And now, so that attack surface was very small, but it's a much different story here today, kind of approaching the end of 2021.
Yes. What do you think banks can do to control some of the vulnerability they face?
Monitoring those external access points becomes key and critical. Malware defenses only bring you some of the way, right? It brings you part of the way there, and it's really your last line of defense. But how we see most often these things kind of unfold is it's usually your O365 email and then your VPN are kind of like the first things to fall over to hackers, and then eventually there's malware being deployed or ransomware. Eventually these things are happening, but in reality, there's a couple of many different things that are occurring over a period of time before it actually gets to that point. So one is having analytic coverage, so that you can monitor those external access points, like your cloud email infrastructure, like your VPN access infrastructure, and frankly, monitoring your antivirus and your endpoint infrastructure as well. And then having, people who it's their sole job in life just to monitor that. I do see in a lot of cases at community banking institutions, people are getting really kind of stretched really thin, right? Not only are you responsible for security, but you're responsible for desktop support. The teller just got locked out of her computer, so they're responsible for that, right? So the amount of jobs that one individual has to do is quite extensive, and what ends up happening is the kind of master of none right? Jack of all trades, master of none. Things end up slipping in certain categories where, when it makes sense to, outsource something to a managed service, you should do it because that's the only thing they do. And they can dedicate a lot more cycles to, certain questions or certain problems that you at the community banking institution could not dedicate those cycles to.
And it used to be that some banks might have felt, oh, we're too small really to be of any interest to any sophisticated hackers, that's something for big companies. But comment on that. My sense is that's really not the case.
It depends which, hackers you're talking about. Like a big nation state, is not going to be as aggressively interested in a very small community bank. I think that's true, right? But ransomware groups are certainly very interested in those organizations. The big organizations are oftentimes harder for them to hit, right? They have applied more resources to the security problems. Not in every case. There have been plenty of big organizations hit by ransomware. And at the same token, you've got organizations that are too small for ransomware that will just never pay. They have 10 computers and a printer, and you know what? If you encrypt 10 computers and a printer, they're just going to say, I'm going to rebuild anyways. You know what I mean? And so there's a nice little sweet spot in there that I actually think even the smallest community banks fit into that sweet spot. They typically have a lot of money on the balance sheet. They're heavily insured, right? So they can pay, insurance money for these types of things. And, even the smallest community banks and, are of a size that is really kind of an appetizing target. So I think, even the smallest banks, if you think you're getting away unscathed, you should probably think again, because I think you're actually a very appetizing target for a lot of nefarious people around the world.
Sure. And we hear in cybersecurity this term security information event management, or SIEM. How does SIEM protect against the kinds of vulnerabilities that you're referring to?
Well, I've noticed about the security space and how it's evolved kind of over time is you have all these disparate systems, right? You do have all these disparate systems, whether it's your cloud email, providing some level of security, maybe anti-phishing, maybe your training, vulnerability scanning, your antivirus, your firewall. You've got all these different, different kind of security technologies that are deployed. And even for a security operations center to be able to monitor all these things effectively, the only way to do that, frankly, is to bring them all into one place, to bring them all into one centralized location. Through technology, it doesn't have to logically, everything have to come to one location, but through technology, you make it appear that all of these disparate technological solutions are coming into one point. And then this gives, any analyst the opportunity to very quickly, say, oh, this happened on antivirus. What happened on the firewall? What happened on, this other device? What happened on this other device, right? So you very quickly can kind of switch around to all these different technologies and see, potentially a different attack from many different optical, viewpoints, right? And so that's why it's important to bring this all in into one centralized location, which fundamentally has been, the core of what now has become XDR, extended detection and response solutions, as we're bringing that, that data into one centralized location. Then on top of that, of course, you have to equip, the people who are responsible for analyzing and making some kind of analytic conclusion about an event or a series of events. You have to, enable them to take some kind of dedicated action to, resolve whatever it is, the threat or the malfunction, the IT operation failure that may be occurring, at a particular endpoint.
Sure. What factors would you say most influence a bank's chances of being subject to cybercrime?
Well, the biggest one I would say now, especially when you're talking e-crime, is having a significant darknet exposure. That is one of the things that our product, of course, provides. We look, out into the open, deep, and dark web. We synchronize it in with all of your Active Directory accounts, and we say, hey, this account is at a high risk of actually being breached. These, ransomware groups really aren't kind of e-crime groups aren't reinventing the wheel in any way. They just want to, They just want to conduct these crimes and extort money from people. And to do that, they take the path of least resistance, just like everyone else does with anything else that they can do, right? So they're looking, they're trolling the dark web, looking for these breached account lists, username and password combinations. They troll these lists. They see, someone, a domain name that's interesting. And when they find a domain name that's interesting with a password combination, they give it a try across a couple of different methods. Maybe the O365, maybe they're able to find and track down the VPN for that organization. And then, eventually they find one that works, right? And you go through that a couple of different times. You're gonna find a username password combination that works. Once they found a username and password combination that works, they have access to the environment. They can go in there. They can deploy whatever it is they want to deploy and conduct, all the bad things that you hear about in the news. So, for the most part, the technical portion of these kinds of hacks, and the reason they're able to do them so quickly and effectively is because they're doing them by the simplest methods possible. So if you are a bank and you have a very high darknet exposure capacity, or maybe you think it's a good idea to hop on the NIST 800, like don't change my passwords for a year because, hey, that's really easy, right? If NIST says, if your password's 14 characters in length and you have all these different, switches in it, and now we're telling you it's okay, you don't have to change it for a year. What they're not taking into account is everyone likes to reuse their password, right? And those passwords end up in a data breach, and then the password doesn't change for a year, and then it becomes a very real darknet exposure vulnerability. Personally, I think any bank that's kind of subscribing to that utility of saying, well, NIST tells me I'm okay to not change my password, is not taking into the account that these people are reusing their passwords, and it becomes, you're asking for trouble. It becomes a very serious vulnerability.
What recommendations would you make for a bank seeking to grow its cybersecurity roadmap for the coming year?
Yep, get a SOC, right? Get someone whose dedicated job it is to conduct that function. Get a platform that's truly able to extend beyond just the endpoints into your cloud application technology, bringing in your cloud email or maybe some other cloud apps that you have and that you utilize. One that can bring in your core. The core banking platform is often the most forgotten about system, I feel like, in the security ecosystem that exists at community banks. And it's also obviously the most important system, right, that exists at community banks. And so, it's forgotten about all the time. So bring in that, that core banking platform into your overarching security and compliance ecosystem. These tenets are very important if you want to, achieve the next level or take a step forward, in your security posture and security practitioner at your bank.
And let's close with you taking a look kind of out into the future. What do you think the future of SIEMs looks like as it pertains to banks, community banks?
I think everything, as I look at it, is in what you would call middle market finance, is going to morph into a service delivered component of some kind. There's going to be, technology has its place, and we certainly sell our technology without any service component if there are those that want it delivered that way. But saying that, everything's kind of got services attached to it, and this has become very popular in the middle market. So I think the specific terms for all these different technologies, whether it's XDR or SOAR or SIEM, or all these different platforms, when you start taking a look at most of the businesses in the United States, you're going to see every single one of these platforms be service enabled in some capacity.
Mm-hmm. Well, Rob, we are running up against our time, but this has been a very informative discussion. Thank you for sharing your insights. My guest has been Robert Johnston, founder and CEO of Adlumin. Rob, thanks again for being part of our BankBeat.biz Quick Takes video blog today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be back.
Great to have you. Look forward to seeing you again at our next BankBeat.biz Quick Takes video blog.
Awesome.